Welcome to WP-Tonic, episode 158. Today we've got Rachel Andrew of the Perch CMS and also a expert on the CSS Grid. Before we get into today's episode, I want to give a big shout out to our sponsor. WP-Tonic is being sponsored by Liquid Web for this episode. Liquid Web is a fully managed hosting company offering managed WordPress hosting. Liquid Web's managed WordPress is designed for mission-critical sites that want to maximize uptime, increase capacity, and improve performance. Liquid Web is the partner that businesses want. With Liquid Web, your content and site are always safe. They're optimized for speed. You can manage all of your sites easily through a single portal. Every Liquid Web managed WordPress customer will get a license of iThemes Sync Pro included with their monthly subscription. And for you listeners of this podcast, Liquid Web is offering a 33% discount for 6 months. Just head on over to liquidweb.com/WordPress and use the code WP-Tonic33 at checkout. With that, I want to introduce or let our guests introduce themselves. Rachel, for those that don't know you, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm Rachel Andrew. I am one half of a company called edgeofmyseat.com, and what we do these days, pretty much everything that we do, is we develop and support our content management system called Perch and Perch Runway. So that's kind of what the day job is. And I guess my kind of weird hobby is that I am a part of the CSS Working Group, and I do CSS stuff and open web platform stuff. I've been involved in web standards for a very long time. So that's kind of what I also do when I'm not working. It's some more work.
Excellent. I also want to introduce my co-host, Jonathan.
Oh, hi there, folks. I'm the founder of WP-Tonic. We're a maintenance support company in WordPress for business owners, bloggers, and we have industry partners. We are a trusted partner.
Excellent. And I'm John Locke. My business is Lockdown Design, and I help blue-collar businesses with their WordPress sites and local SEO. The question I like to ask everybody when they come on the show is what's your origin story? How did you first get into web development?
Kind of by accident. I'm actually a trained dancer. That was what I intended to do. So I left school at 16 to go to college to do dance. I kind of predate the web and computers and things. We had a computer in my school, the senior school I was at. It was in the art room. That was it. So I learned to type on electric typewriters. So I never had any interest in anything to do with computers. My father's a programmer, but it wasn't something I was pretty interested in. And it wasn't until I left the theatre because I was pregnant with my daughter and ended up with a computer, mainly because I wanted to take in typing work. I thought it was something I could do because I could type. I thought I could take in and type up people's essays and that sort of stuff. And it was, that was 96, late 96, and the web was kind of a thing by then. And I really got involved with the web because I was, a young pregnant woman, and then I had a baby, and I didn't know anyone else with a baby, and so I was using the web to chat to other people who had babies all over the world. And so I kind of got into building websites just to put stuff online, like baby photos, just to share stuff with my new friends, who were all over the world. And so that was really it. It was just that sharing of content. And because it was such early days, the minute I could build a website, people were like, "Oh, you can build a website. Can you build me a website?" And so I started building people websites, and that was really where it started. It was just sort of figuring some stuff out and then helping other people with sites because I'd worked it all out. And that's really how it's carried on to today. I'm just figuring stuff out and sharing that with other people.
No, that's an excellent story. And I kind of remembered, those times, getting into the web as a user and then, building stuff for people. And for me, it wasn't that long ago. It really wasn't. One of the things I want to ask you about is, with CSS Grid, with Flexbox, with CSS shapes and regions, and all these things that are going to be supported by browsers, fully in the very near future.
Mhm.
We're kind of getting the promise of what CSS was supposed to solve in the first place. And I think back to, the early days with the CSS Zen Garden. People were like blown away by like how much you could do with it. And I really feel like we're going to be entering like the next golden age. And I would just love to hear like your thoughts on what the web is going to look like over the next few years, and the types of possibilities that are opening up.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the CSS Zen Garden is interesting because that was really a time when people used to kind of experiment on their own sites. And all of us had personal sites because that was how you published things. Before Facebook and Flickr and, all these places where you can just put content without needing to build a website. So back then we all had our own personal blogs, and a lot of us used those blogs as a kind of like a playground. Like, oh, here's this new, when you could do CSS for layout for the very first time, you'd think, oh, I'll do that on my site because it's fine. It's mainly web designers come to my site anyway, who probably got decent browsers, and I don't really care if it all falls apart. But we've sort of lost a lot of those personal sites, and I kind of worry, where are people going to do that kind of creativity that we saw in the past? What you tend to get is people do little experiments on CodePen, and they'll share those. They'll say, oh, look, here's my cat walking across the screen, do some animated thing or whatever. And that's great. And it's great fun. And those things are lovely to look at. But I kind of hope that we'll see more people using places where they can experiment and building real websites with this new stuff. Because that's where it first starts. You don't go and immediately build, a client project using brand new things that only work in half the browsers. But you can probably do that on your own site, as I say, where it's mainly web designers come anyway, who've got the latest Chrome or Firefox or whatever. And probably aren't going to mind if it falls back to something plain or if they're in something else. They're going to understand that, and they're going to poke around and see what you've done. So I think, I hope that people use their personal sites to play again. I would love to see that starting to happen, because I think there's so many interesting new things, and you do need to build real things with them to kind of get to grips with them.
Definitely. And you have a site like that as well, like for CSS Grid?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've got gridbyexample.com, which was really, I've been building all these little bits and pieces to sort of demonstrate Grid and to show people how things worked, and also just to test the specification as it was developing. So I started sort of putting those together, and that's kind of morphed into a bit of a repository of all things to learn Grid layout. I've got a lot of videos I've done there and things. So it's a good place for people to head if they want to figure out how to start using it. I'll carry on doing that over the next few months.
Over the last few years in web design and web development, this has almost become like a running joke, but it seems like that creativity of the early web, I mean, we still see like some creativity, as you mentioned, like on CodePen. I see some mind-blowing stuff with, SAS variables and CSS3 animations, and people are doing like just incredible stuff. But the majority of the websites that I see getting published maybe aren't like that. They're kind of locked into one of the few, are you designing like this website or this website? Hero image, like stuff on the left and right, just kind of like 3 buckets of stuff, and they're all kind of like the same looking. Do you think that, using stuff like Bootstrap or Foundation has just made people just kind of fall into conventions? And do you think in the next few years, when more things become available to use in the browser for layout, like Grid and Flexbox, do you think we'll see some of that creativity return?
I really hope so. And I hope that what people don't do is look at, say, Grid layout and say, oh, well, let's just replace our Bootstrap Grid for Grid layout and carry on making the same website design. And I'm not at all against frameworks. I'm not a sort of hardline anti-framework person. I'm a business person. We build sites using Foundation at the moment because, we have to get stuff like, support forums and things out of the door. And actually the design of them it basically matters that they're clean and easy to use. Spending an awful lot of business time making a beautiful looking support forum, it isn't a great use of business time. And that's why we have these things, because actually layout is quite difficult at the moment. You know, you have to know an awful lot. If you want to make a robust floated layout by hand, you have to know quite a lot about how all that stuff works and the likely issues that you're going to run into. And so that's why people use the frameworks. And it's not that they're bad. It's just that, yeah, they do stop you from making those creative decisions. And so I think it's, as the new stuff becomes, you know, more usable in more browsers, hopefully people will take a little bit of a step back and say, well, actually, do I need to use Bootstrap's grid here? Or can I just roll my own? You know, maybe use the framework for some other bits and pieces, you know, because it's got some basic styling that's helpful. But then start to use your own grid and your own sort of choices around some of the proportions of things and how things lay out. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. We don't have to throw everything away and say, oh, you've got to start and just use this now because this is the new thing. I think you could start to just bring in bits and pieces of this stuff as you're learning it and as support grows for it.
Definitely. You know, and for those who don't know that much about CSS Grid, because I mean, the spec has been around since 2012, but browser support is just now starting to happen. What are some of the things that they will be able to do?
Well, kind of the big thing that happens with Grid is it's two-dimensional. So if people are probably familiar now with Flexbox, and so Flexbox allows you to do what we call one-dimensional layout. So you can lay things out in a row, or you can lay them out in a column, and you can kind of space them out nicely. And although you can let it wrap, what happens when a flex item, when they wrap onto the next line, each line essentially becomes its own flex container. So they space out across that line. So if you've got 3 things on the first line and 2 on the second, they just sort of split the space, the second 2. They don't line up underneath the top ones. And typically when you teach someone Flexbox, that's the first thing they say is, oh, how can I make the things on the second row line up with the ones above? And you say, well, you can't really, not unless you really sort of stop Flexbox being flexible by giving things widths and so on. And so that's the difference with Grid, is that Grid lets you do this in 2 dimensions. So you can create a grid and then you put your items into it. So if you want them to line up with the things above, then you can do that, that's fine. And you can also do things like span rows, which is something that typically we can't do on the web at the moment. You can't say, oh, I want this thing to be as tall as these other things that are next to it. That's very difficult. Well, that's easy with Grid. So yes, it's 2-dimensional layouts. If you've basically got a bunch of things and you want to be able to set them into a grid, even if that doesn't end up really looking like a grid, then that's what you want, rather than something like Flexbox, which really deals with things on a line-by-line basis. So I think there's lots of stuff. It enables white space because you can leave parts of the grid empty. And again, that's really difficult currently because everything, if you use floats, everything just floats to the top and you can't really leave gaps between stuff because it just all goes up. So I think there are possibilities there in terms of design that people can start to look at.
No, definitely. Go ahead, jump in.
I was just thinking, what a great explanation of something very common.
I've had quite a bit of practice.
that was quite impressive, actually. Where you explained that.
I've been working with Grid now for 5 years, so it's For saying it's just appearing in browsers, I feel like it's been around a very long time.
Well, it has, isn't it? And people have just been, any thoughts why it's been like what John said, it's been available since 2012, but now it's just coming. It looks like in the next year it will be actively used. Why such a long period? Any thoughts about that?
Well, it's taken that long to implement. It's really complicated to get. So in sort of 2011, so with I-10, there was this first implementation of this sort of first draft, really, of what became the current spec. So we had an implementation in IE then. Really around the same time, a little bit later, the implementation started in WebKit and in Blink. So that implementation has been done by a company called Igalia, who are an open source consultancy who write browser code. So they've been doing the implementation into Blink and into WebKit, and that implementation has been paid for by Bloomberg. They sort of sponsored the implementation. And so really they've been working on it consistently throughout that time. You know, this is sort of in collaboration with the CSS Working Group, who are working on the spec at the same time. So you've got browser vendors actually doing the implementation, or people working for browser vendors, and then you've got the CSS Working Group figuring out how everything should actually work. And so this has been going on together at the same time. The spec's been developed and the implementations are growing up, and then sort of later on Firefox got involved and they're doing their implementation. And so we've got the spec developing, and at the CSS Working Group the last meeting, we were still hammering out some of the finer points of grid layout, some of the defaults basically. You know, if someone doesn't set something, what happens then? That kind of stuff. So it's a big spec. There's a lot of it. It's not really like anything else. It touches a lot of other things. You know, what happens when someone absolutely positions something inside their grid? What happens if, you know, someone doesn't fully specify the grid? You know, what are the fallbacks? You know, there's all sorts of stuff that has to be worked out, and it has to work in all the browsers. It has to be interoperable. So it's actually, you know, it's not that people stopped work on this at any point. You know, and you can look back over my blog, there's posts going back through the whole history of it where I'm saying, oh, look, this has been decided, or we've changed the name of this, or we've now got into grid gaps, and you know, so the whole time that's been developed, and that's just how long these things take.
Is it really hard to get agreement from all the people who are, you know, well, and the reason I ask this is because a lot of people probably don't realize like how the W3C actually works, and like coming to agreement on how things work, and all the different entities that are involved in inputting that stuff. So, you know, how difficult is it like moving it forward, like when you're dealing with, say, the different browser representatives and, you know, the other people that are involved, like, you know, there's people like Adobe and there's even like other, you know, ISPs and different people on the W3C now.
Yeah, so all of this happens in the open, so you can actually go and have a look, and now a lot of it is now happening on GitHub, so you can go along to the CSS Working Group GitHub repository and have a look. All the specs are there. You can see the issues, so you can see some of the arguments just in the issues there. You'll have, you know, a browser, someone who's doing the implementation at Firefox, and someone doing the implementation for Blink might be having a bit of an argument in the comments there about which way they think something should go. And it's just really like any software development, you know. I mean, developing specs is very like developing any software. And if you've got a bunch of people, you've got a bunch of developers in a room who need to figure out the best way to do something, you'll probably have a few arguments before you get the final thing. And actually that's a good thing, because people are going to raise different points of view, you know. And then at the working group, you've got people like me. I'm not a browser developer. I don't write browser code. And I've got a point of view from the point of view of people who write CSS, people who use CSS. And so I'm throwing in my ideas into the mix and saying, well, hang on, you know, if I don't want this to disappear to nothing, that'll be confusing to people, or, you know. So there's lots of people throwing their opinions in, and most of the time a debate will happen. People will air their opinions, and then at the meetings, it'll often go to like a straw poll. We have telecon meetings where we use IRC and we all vote. And then we have the face-to-face where we can actually stick our hands in the air. And so generally things will be resolved like that. And then unless someone comes back and says, right, I found a showstopper, we can't do this because, then that'll be what the decision is. And those decisions can be all sorts of things. They can be as trivial as, well, what could we name this thing? What should we call it? Or they could be, you know, quite far-reaching in terms of browser code and implementations people are going to have to do. But yeah, that's pretty much, you know, there are heated discussions sometimes, but that's what happens when you get a bunch of people into a room who all really care about making it good. And that's the nice thing. You know, I've just come back from Seattle, and it was really great spending time, you know, with all these people who just really, really care about making this stuff good. And they're all from different points of view. They work on different browsers. But, you know, there really is a feeling that we're trying to make something that's great here, and that's going to be really useful and people are going to be happy with. And when it, goes out into browsers, we all want developers to be really excited when they get their hands on Grid and they can use it. So that's, generally how it is. People aren't just being argumentative for the sake of it. Generally, it's because they want to make the platform better.
Definitely. Jonathan, go ahead.
I think actually we better go for our first break, John, and
That's
then come back and
what I was thinking.
Yeah, let's go for our first break, John.
All right. When we come back from the break, we'll be talking more with Rachel Andrew. We're coming back from our break, and we're talking with Rachel Andrew, who's a noted expert in CSS Grid, but also the creator of the Perch CMS. And Rachel, I want to ask you too, like our audience is mostly people who work in WordPress, which is, a rather large CMS, but compared to WordPress, Perch is actually rather streamlined, and yeah. And what are like some ways that, Perch differs from a WordPress or a Drupal or a Joomla?
Yeah, so the kind of core idea behind Perch was this idea of structured content. I mean, both Drew and myself were Web Standards project members. So we've both had this very, very long history of being involved with Open Web Standards, and sort of seeing things like semantic markup and being able to use your own markup as being very, very important. And we'd also built quite a lot of content management, sort of custom content management things prior to launching Perch on a sort of fairly large scale things, where we'd taken this structured content approach because that was really the only way we could see people being able to use decent markup and mark up things as they should be, and also be able to sort of manage that content, in some sort of way that you don't have to be technical to do. So we had this sort of idea of having these templates which described the content. And the other thing that Perch does is once you've created a template for your content, which is going to display on the front end of your website, and it encloses all your fields with the right markup, which might be HTML5 markup. You could be using all the sort of new HTML5 tags. Once you have that template and you go and you visit the page, then that template becomes the schema in the admin. So you don't have to create any custom fields or anything like that. Perch just is custom fields. That's just how it works. So you've got a bunch of field types. You've created your template, you've loaded that page in the browser, you go to the admin and there's your form and you fill it in. So if you've got, say, an event on that page and you go to your admin, you've got a nice form there to capture all the details about your event. So that might be dates or what have you and things. So it allows people to create quite complex data structures without having to mess around, with anything particularly technical to do that. A lot of the sort of people who use Perch, the sort of original product, are designers, they're not developers. And so we try and make it as straightforward and as much like writing HTML markup as possible. They don't have to mess around with the PHP and things. We've kind of taken that a step further with Runway, which is a lot more of a sort of a developer version of Perch. I mean, one of the things that we're going to ship in 3 for Runway is like a headless CMS, so people can create content and then use it perhaps in a phone app or something. They can use it as JSON or whatever they want. Because we've got this nice structured content, we can then do all sorts of interesting things with it. So that's something that we want to do more for Runway.
Yeah, it's when we were discussing you coming on the show, you said, "Well, Jonathan, you're about WordPress." I do use Perch when I don't feel WordPress is suitable, and I think it's a fantastic product, and you've been working on it for a number of years, and it's great to see the success that you've developed with it. But what have been some of the challenges of running the company, and that how long has it been running now, actually, Rachel?
We launched in 2009, so yeah, we're sort of like 8 years coming up. Yeah, it's I think a lot of the challenge is actually probably very similar to to the same challenges that WordPress have, just on a smaller scale. You know, I mean, it's a self-hosted system, so you have all the problems of people's terrible PHP hosting.
But you do not get that with Liquid Web, folks. You get superb hosting, don't you?
But as you can imagine, we see all of the terrible web hosting. We know all of the terrible things that people can do to configure PHP, and things like really out of date PHP. I mean, you know, people complain they don't want to be off PHP 5.3. You're like, when was that end of life? You know, so it's all that sort of stuff, which I think is common to all of these products. You know, whether it's WordPress or Drupal or us, you know, or you know, any of the other sort of self-hosted CMSs, we all have this issue where people think, oh, I just need some PHP hosting, and so go and use, you know, a $2.99 a month host that's not been updated for 5 years, and so that, I mean, that's a challenge because it burns up a lot of support time. A lot of our support is nothing to do with our product, nothing that we can do anything about other than just help people, because it's their hosting or it's actually their own front end code that they're having problems with, or, you know, so a lot of people coming into our support don't know where Perch stops and they start, or when Perch stops and their hosting starts. And so there's not a lot we can actually do to sort of stop that. We just have to help them. And so that can use up an awful lot of time.
Yeah, I'd imagine it is. That's one of the biggest time resources that you struggle with. You know, you also, the other thing I love about it is you've gone into e-commerce, haven't you? And
Yes.
I think it's really sweet what you're doing in that area, because I have nothing against WooCommerce, but it's a bit of a monster, and just for a couple products, I don't exactly recommend it. But I've sent some people to Perch because I really think it's a really sweet product, you know. So how's that been going on the e-commerce? Has that been growing considerably?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are really into it. It seems to be driving Runway sales, so the bigger system. You know, people are using, because we really built the e-commerce to go with Runway rather than just Perch, because things like the routing and stuff we've got in Runway makes that a lot easier. Yeah, it's going quite well. I mean, obviously, e-commerce is such a huge subject, but what we wanted to do was give people the same control over their products and their checkout experience and all of that they have in Perch, because, you know, people who use Perch are used to being able to design anything they want and be able to build it. And then they'd go to e-commerce and it'd be like, oh, we're going to have to go to Shopify, or we're going to have to go to some solution which is just going to make us, you know, the cart is like this, the checkout experience is like this. Even sometimes the products have to be displayed like this. And you're like, well, that's not Perch-like. That's not what we do. So that was kind of, we were sort of backed into a corner of having to produce this because we wanted our customers to have something that was as flexible as the rest of Perch. And yeah, it's a huge amount of work, and there's, you know, always endless numbers of things we could be doing. I mean, both for Perch and for the e-commerce stuff. We kind of just have this policy of, you know, what will make the most difference to the most people, and just kind of filter the requests and say, right, you know, if we do this thing, there's probably a few hundred people, maybe a few thousand people at this point, you know, who would benefit. Whereas there might be something that there are a couple of people shouting for, but we know it's not going to make a difference to a lot of people. So we kind of just have to manage our time like that, you know, and obviously some people are going to be disappointed that they don't get their pet feature, but, you know, there's never, even if we were a team of 100, there'd still be many things we could be doing, you know. It's pretty much, there's so much possibility, really.
So so the company's bootstrapped, is that not correct?
Yeah.
So have you ever considered taking VC money?
We're not really, to be honest. Even if we were into that idea, we're not particularly a fundable company. We're not interested in selling it. We're not interested in, you know, sort of any kind of exit. This is just what we do.
Right.
You know, so we're not really that kind of company, really. So yeah, you know, I'm not against VC money. It's just that's not sort of what we do, and it would change the focus, I think, a lot, because as I say, at the moment we make decisions based on, you know, what would be the best thing for our customers. You know, what would they like? Whereas a VC would be thinking, well, what's going to make the most money? And sometimes those two things go in parallel, but sometimes they don't. You know, so it's quite nice to have that freedom to make those decisions ourselves.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I recommend it to people, because of, you know, because of you and the company and the ethics of the company. I know it's rock solid, you know, and
Well, that's it. We're not going to disappear. We're not going to be acqui-hired. We're not, you know, they were not interested in that, you know, and I think people have been burned, and I think that's happening quite, you know, people are seeing that now, that you sort of hand over an awful lot to a company, which then suddenly, you know, posts their, oh, you know, we've got some marvelous news, our wonderful story, we're going off to do this, and then they just abandon the product. And yeah, you know, I think people can have confidence that this is what we do, this is how we make our living, and we're not planning to stop doing that. So, you know.
I think in the jargon of the Bay Area, it's called a pivot, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't know if the thing you're using is going to be the same tomorrow, you know.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, you know, and that's the thing that happens, that we're seeing a lot. Like, a lot of companies get acquired, or a lot of, you know, agencies got acquired, you know, a few years ago, and got sucked up into companies. And your product is, you charge money for Perch. It's a lot of CMSs out there are open source, like Drupal, WordPress, Joomla, all those sorts of ones. They're open source, and people expect them to, you know, a lot of the stuff that's associated with them to be free.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to point our listeners to an excellent article that you wrote about a year ago called "The High Price of Free" on a list apart. And what you said in this article, a lot of it resonated not only with me, but a lot of things that I'm hearing from colleagues. Because unless people own an agency, or they have a really successful product, they're feeling a lot of the same things that you were saying in this article, in that to be sustainable, people have to you know, get something back for what they're putting in, and not everything can be free. You know, what are your thoughts on open source, and like the things that we expect people to do without compensation?
Yeah, you know, I mean, so much of the web that we have is built on open source, and on people giving their time free. Now, you know, I give a huge amount of my own time for free with the stuff I do with the CSS Working Group, for instance. That's voluntary, and to the extent of it actually costs me money, because I have to fly myself to meetings. I spend time, you know, sort of doing that. So that's cool, but there has to be kind of limits to that, and we have to also encourage people to do things that they charge money for. Particularly younger people who are sort of getting into the industry and are just excited, and they're like, oh, you know, I can do this, I can help with that. But we also need to make sure that, like, they know that, you know, it's okay to charge money for this. You know, maybe you could put all this work you're doing into an ebook that you could get some money for, or perhaps you could charge for helping people with these things. Or, you know, I think it's about setting those expectations that it's okay to earn money from things, because I mean, we get not as much as we used to. When we first launched Perch, we got quite a lot of nastiness directed to us. You know, how dare you charge for this thing?
That's
Well,
terrible. It's terrible, Rachel. People be nasty to you. You're one of my favourite people on the web.
But it's like, you know, it's because they expect things to be free, and it's like they couldn't understand how we could possibly be charging for this thing. And you know, the fact that we charge the thing is why it's still around, because we can afford to support it. We can afford to keep developing it. And I think, you know, that's what I ask people to look at as well. If things are free, then either people are giving their time for nothing, and eventually that's not going to be sustainable. They're going to give up. They're going to have to go and earn money, and so then the thing gets abandoned. Or it's free because there's all this money behind it from somewhere else. And in that situation, then it's either going to be a case of the project is going to be bought by someone and maybe killed, or just turned into something different, or you're essentially paying by giving over rights to your personal information, and so you're being advertised to, stuff about you is being sold. You know, everything does have a cost, and there are things that are absolutely free because someone has bothered to spend some time doing something and put it out there for free. You know, I mean, things like, you know, tutorials I write or whatever. But if that person doesn't have a sustainable way of making a living as well, eventually it's just going to be abandoned, because everyone's got to eat. Or people get older, they get a family, and it's suddenly like, well, hang on, I need to provide for my kids here, so I can't do all this free work, I better get a job, and then their projects get abandoned. So, you know, it's really in the interest of all of us that we make sure that people who are doing cool stuff are compensated in some way, because otherwise they have to stop doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The total reason why I bring that up is because when I look at like other parts of the web, there are so many things that I see within the WordPress ecosystem that seem like, you know, people give a lot of stuff for free, and that whole thing, the business side of it, is something that people really do struggle with. And I think there is like a lot of expectation within our WordPress community that we do a lot of things for free. And I can just see like a point where things begin to mutate, or, you know, they're not sustainable in the way that they are.
Well, it's a really interesting point you're making, actually, John, because I know a few agencies in my area, and a lot of them, they actively don't use WordPress, and they don't. The reasons why they don't use it, John, is not that they don't think it's good or they don't like it, but they don't want to be linked to this attitude which they sense from clients and from some elements of the WordPress community, that it all should be free, and they find it easier to bid for projects when they're using other content management systems that don't quite have that feeling that it's easy and it should be free. It's quite interesting, really. But you don't exactly overcharge really for Perch, do you, Rachel? Really?
No. Because, you know, the thing is, in our sort of business model relies on people building multiple sites. So because we have a license fee per site, it's in our interest to have people who build lots and lots of sites. And we have some agencies who, particularly with Perch, which is great for kind of your small marketing sites and things like that, where people create a whole load of templates and things that they use, and they're building maybe 2 sites a week sometimes. You know, they're building lots and lots of these small sites, often around a certain market vertical. You know, they build sites for doctor surgeries, or they build sites for, you know, some particular part of the market. And, you know, for Perch, they're great customers. They can build things very rapidly with Perch, and they buy, you know, a license per site as they do these sites. And so that's really the model, is not so much charge an incredibly high price for the product and hope people will buy a license. What we hope is that people will keep coming back, because as well, our support costs go down, because if someone knows how to use Perch, they're not going to be in our forum asking us questions all day because they've figured it out. So we find that, you know, obviously we tend to see people when they're building their first site, because they might have some questions or want to know how best to implement something. But then we might not see them until they're onto their 5th site and they're doing something they've not done before, and or we've got something new and they want to try it out, and then we might see them in support again. So, you know, it's in our interest to encourage people to be using Perch for lots of projects, and that's really how we kind of have repeating revenue, even though we're not a subscription product.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I mean, and like you mentioned before, I'm really excited to see the new version of Runway, because it actually will be like a headless CMS and separate content from presentation. And there's so many things that you can do with Perch. I mean, there's really not any limits to it. Anything that you can do on another CMS, you can do with Perch. And I really think in a lot of ways it's more lightweight than most of the CMSs out there that basically try and do everything.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rachel.
One of the sort of really key things behind Perch and Runway is making things fast. It's really, really important on the web today that your sites are fast. You know, Google cares about your site being fast. So we do an awful lot of stuff, optimizations, to make sure that even on the terrible shared hosting, you know, Perch and Runway will be really fast. And that's the, you know, we make decisions based on that. You know, sometimes if we might need to make the developer do like an extra step, but that means that the site is a lot faster, because we feel that actually what you want is for at runtime it's be as fast as possible. And so we're making those decisions all the time, is how do we make this faster, even if the environment it runs in isn't great. So that's a key thing, and that's something that you often lose, particularly in projects. You know, I'm not here to WordPress bash, but with something like WordPress, you've got a lot of people writing plugins and things for the software, and the quality of those is going to be different, but also they're not necessarily all going to work together quite quite as cleanly. You know, you can end up doing the same, you know, doing a lot of processing twice or 3 times because you're using plugins and stuff.
Right.
And that's something we can get away from because we have a lot more control over what's happening. And if people are developing add-ons, they're doing that via our API, so we can sort of encourage them into good practices that way. So that's kind of something which I think is probably a key difference is our control over that environment and the speed that it can all operate in.
Yeah, it's fascinating really because, you know, the plugin structure of WordPress was one of the main things and still is the thing that really drives a lot of people to WordPress. And it's a great system, but it also has some drawbacks because fundamentally there is no perfect content management system. There is no perfect hosting company. There is no perfection anywhere. You just have to look at your needs and then make some kind of logical, semi-logical choice, haven't you, Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I wouldn't say, and we do turn people away. You know, people will ask us, "Oh, is Perch right for this sort of scenario?" And we'll say, "Actually, no, I don't think that's going to be so great for you either because of the person who's doing the work, and maybe it's not really matching up with their skills, or they've got some sort of project that really shouts out for another solution." We're not in the business of trying to convince people to use our product when they should be doing something else, because as developers, we don't always use the same products. You know, there's sometimes you think, I mean, for instance, our docs are running on a static site generator because it's documentation. It's basically a set of markdown files, you know. And so we made a choice of, we'll use a static site generator. We could have built it in Perch and Runway, but it works very nicely because it means we can keep everything just as markdown, just in a text editor. So, you know, like anyone, we would make the same decisions, you know, is this the right solution? Is that the right solution? And we'd encourage other people to do so. I mean, we'd really like people to consider Perch and Runway as an option. And ask us questions about it. But.
Yeah, do you really like Matt at the WordCamp USA in December? He kind of, in his state of WordPress, he kind of really strongly hinted, or basically said that he saw most of the main competition to WordPress coming from hosted solutions like Wix and Weebly, and there's a number of others. Do you feel the same, that really a lot of your competition is coming from hosted solutions?
I think the competition it's a competition really at the bottom end of the market. It used to be that if you wanted a website, you were a business wanting a website, you'd go to a sort of small-time web designer, you know, the sort of person who would build you an inexpensive website. And those people, I think, you know, have been the WordPress users. There've certainly been a lot of the Perch users, you know, the people building the sites for people who they met at the Chamber of Commerce meeting and then needed a website. Now, it's that end of the market is the one that's getting commoditized and getting hoovered up by Squarespace and so on. Because actually, if your friend comes to you and says, "Oh, I've just started a new personal training business and I've got 200 quid to spend on a website," then actually what you'd say to them is, "Oh, well, you could sign up for Squarespace or Wix or whatever and pay a little bit every month and you'd have a perfectly acceptable website." Because all they really need is to be able to say to people, "Go to my website and you'll get my contact details and you can call me and we'll set up an appointment." And so it's those smaller sites, I think there is less opportunity for people to run businesses around providing small sites for people. And so therefore, they're not then looking for content management systems for those small sites because those people are just going and building themselves a website on Squarespace. And so I think, yes, you know, that then has an effect on all of us because where do people get in? Well, they get in further up. They get in with more complex projects. And then that's a different decision that they're making. So yeah, I think that there is, definitely an issue there with those sort of hosted solutions because some of them are pretty good.
Yeah, Square, I would say of all, it has, I'm not going to choose my words carefully here. Of them all, I would say Squarespace is the best one, but it still has certain drawbacks that are not totally evident, like getting your domain name. If you buy the domain name from, getting it back.
Don't do that.
Absolutely. But I think, you know, you can see for those people who would have typically gone to a web designer, they're not now. They're just able to hop online and make themselves a website in an evening with a template. And actually a lot of people, that's they think, oh, that looks quite nice. And that's as far as it goes. You know, they really wanted an online business card, essentially. They're probably using Facebook for a lot of their business sort of outreach and things. They just want a website because, oh, well, they'd quite like to have their email address at their domain name, and they thought they should have something there, you know.
Yeah. No,
So,
and I do agree. I am seeing that as well. You know, definitely like the people that I run into, that that end of the market really is commoditized. And I think the people that do, you know, need someone to help them like continually, that's where there's still an opportunity.
yeah, and I think also the people who operate in very sort of niche markets and know a lot about that market. So as I say, where we've got these people who build lots of sites for very specific verticals, so for the doctor's surgeries or wherever, they just know that market so well. They can go in, they can say, right, we can build you a site, it's going to do all of these things, we know what you need, we know what your customers or, you know, your patients want to know, and they'll build these websites because they know a lot about that. And I think there's an opportunity there for people to turn their businesses into that kind of business that really focuses on one type of customer, and has a, you know, a good track record with them, because there's a lot of confidence to be had from someone saying, well, here are 50 other sites for other doctors that we've done, and they're really great and been successful for them.
Well, I think it's really, I don't know if you agree with this, Rachel, you know, what you were saying about, you know, people going to Wix and blah, blah, blah. But funny enough, on the other side, it's become much easier to build an online business card kind of website. But I said to John a few episodes ago, to actually get traffic to that, you know, if you need more than that, you're actually looking to get traffic to that website and then convert it, then it becomes a totally different game, doesn't it? And to actually make money online, or to make that site get a return on investment, if you actually expect that or it's needed, it's become much more complicated and more difficult, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think in that case, you know, web designers who want to be able to help people with that side of things, you know, that's a whole other set of skills. You know, you can't just be a geek building websites anymore. If you're going to need to understand business, you need to understand, you know, how to get people to, you know, how to get leads to the site, to convert, to buy things, to pick up the phone or whatever it is you want them to do. You know, there's a whole bunch of skills there that, you know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and actually nobody thought about any of this stuff. We were just building websites, you know, and hoping they kind of worked. So there's a whole lot of places, I think, where people can still make a living doing this stuff, but it's not what it was. It's not, you can't just be someone who builds websites. I think these days you've got to figure out exactly how you're going to help people, and do more than a Squarespace can do for them.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I don't think actually, folks, we're going to go for bonus content because we had some technical challenges with this, and Rachel's a very sporty dealing with our slight technical troubles. So we're using a different platform. We're actually using Zoom to record this, because our normal Google Hangout had a little bit of a fit with me. But I upgraded my operating system over the weekend, and it went great, but I've been having some minor issues that have been appearing gradually. So hopefully we've recorded this. John pressed the button, and hopefully my other recording mechanism has worked, folks. I'm just giving you some boring insights there, folks. But Rachel was very patient with us. But it's been a joy talking to you, Rachel. You know, you've been such a great contributor to the web design community, and I just wanted to say that it's really, I personally want to say that I've learned an enormous amount from your articles and your contribution.
Thank you. That's nice to know.
Myself as well. Yourself and many others that were in the early web standards crowd were some of the very first people that I learned from when I was learning to build websites myself. So I thank you as well.
And before we go, folks, I just want again is to thank our new sponsor, Liquid Web, who's become our major sponsor over the coming episodes in the new year. Great company, a great history of providing quality hosting rather than some of the rubbish hosting Rachel was talking about, and it's really appreciated that they decided to support the show, isn't it, John?
Definitely. And for our listeners out there, if you want to support the show by leaving us a review on iTunes, we'd greatly appreciate that. If you're getting any value out of our twice weekly, WordPress business podcast, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps surface the show, helps other people find it. Leave a detailed review. With that, I'm going to let everybody tell us where to find them. Rachel, where can we find you online?
Well, my site is rachelandrew.co.uk, and that's where I sort of have my blog and various bits and pieces. You can find out where I'm speaking. I'm also at Rachel Andrew on Twitter, where I'm most days complaining about aeroplanes and airports mostly. And the product is Perch, and we're at grabberperch.com if you want to check out what we do.
Excellent. Jonathan, where do we find you?
We can get me on Twitter at Jonathan Denwood. I'm normally on there most days. Or you could email me. I do answer my email, not the same day, but you will get an answer like Rachel. That's Jonathan at WP-Tonic.com.
Excellent. And you can find me at my website, which is lockdowndesign.com. And you can also find me on Twitter, lockdown_. For the WP-Tonic, signing off. Our next Saturday episode, be sure to catch us 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time every Saturday. And our next hosted interview, 160, that's going to be with Jonathan Stark. So be sure to check that out. Adios.
Bye.
Bye.